From as early as I can remember, I was the one who never seemed to fit the mold my family had carved out for themselves. My sisters, Claire and Hannah, were mirror reflections of everything my parents valued: graceful, proper, and obedient. They wore pastel dresses and smiled on command, like porcelain dolls in a cabinet of perfection. I, on the other hand, preferred charcoal sketches to lipstick, books to gossip, solitude to spotlights. My mother used to sigh whenever I entered a room, as if my very existence disrupted her perfect symmetry. "Ariana," she would say, her voice dipped in disappointment, "must you always be so different?" At first, I thought being different was something I could fix. I tried to mimic my sisters, wore their style, copied their polite laughter, even practiced their gentle way of walking. But no matter how hard I tried, I was always too much of something: too loud, too quiet, too blunt, too odd. My father would glance over his newspaper and say, "You really ought to be more like your sisters." And each time he said it, something inside me quietly broke. When Claire got engaged, the whole house turned into a festival. My mother held planning meetings that lasted hours, filled with color palettes, flower samples, and seating charts. I hovered in the doorway once, clutching a sketchbook, hoping to be included. Claire smiled at me briefly and said, "Maybe you can help paint some signs or something." My mother's sharp look cut through the air. "Let's not make it messy, dear." Weeks later, I found out about her bridal shower through Facebook. The caption under the photo read, "Surrounded by the people who matter most." I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes blurred. Everyone was there: every cousin, every aunt, even our old neighbor Mrs. Ford, who once yelled at me for climbing her fence. Everyone but me. I tried not to take it personally, but the same thing happened when Hannah got married 2 years later. I wasn't invited to the rehearsal dinner, or the bachelorette trip, or even the wedding itself. I sent her a gift anyway, a hand-painted portrait of her and her fiancé smiling beneath a sunset. It came back to my apartment 3 weeks later, returned with a note in neat handwriting. "This doesn't fit our decor." That night, I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by the things my family didn't want. My art, my letters, my attempts at love. It was strange how rejection could echo louder than words. I wasn't the rebellious one, the cruel one, or even the jealous one. I was simply me, and somehow that was unforgivable. By the time my cousin's wedding came, I stopped waiting for invitations. I scrolled through the photos online, watching their filtered smiles, the matching dresses, the proud captions about family. Each picture was like a tiny reminder that there was a celebration happening somewhere I wasn't welcome. Still, a part of me held on to hope that one day they would look at me and see more than the different one. But deep down, I knew the truth. In my family, sameness was sacred. Anything that dared to stand apart was quietly erased. And I, Ariana, the so-called black sheep, had been erased long before I ever realized it. It wasn't one single moment that shattered me. It was 1,000 small cuts that finally bled me dry. Each unanswered message, each forgotten invitation, each photo I saw online without my face in it. You think you'd get used to being left out, that it would hurt less each time, but the truth is, loneliness doesn't dull, it deepens. When my cousin Lauren got married, I decided to show up anyway. I drove 2 hours to the little chapel where the ceremony was held, parked my car down the street, and watched from behind the fence. I could hear the music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. My mother's voice drifted above it, all refined, proud, untouchable. She laughed at something, Claire said, her pearls glinting in the afternoon light. None of them noticed me standing there, dressed in the same navy, blue dress I'd worn to every wedding I'd never been invited to. I drove home before the reception even ended, the steering wheel slick beneath my trembling hands. The radio played a song about family and forever, and for the first time, I turned it off halfway through. Weeks later, there was a rare family gathering, a birthday dinner for my father. I almost didn't go, but some fragile thread inside me wanted to believe that maybe, this time, things would be different. The restaurant was loud and cheerful, every table filled with people laughing too loudly. I sat at the far end, ignored except for the polite questions about work and weather. At one point, my mother leaned over and said, "Ariana, dear, you've been so quiet tonight. That was it." That single, meaningless sentence was the spark that lit everything I'd been holding in. "Why do you always leave me out?" I asked, my voice trembling but steady enough to draw silence from the whole table. Why am I never invited to anything that matters to this family? Her fork froze midway to her mouth. For a moment, she looked at me with something like pity. Then she sighed the kind of sigh that sounds like disappointment wearing perfume. "Oh, Ariana," she said softly, "you know how you are. You're different. You always stand out, and not always in a good way. We just didn't want you to feel uncomfortable. You wouldn't have fit in." Her words didn't come out cruel. They came out casual, practiced, as if she'd said them to herself 100 times before. And maybe she had. I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. My father cleared his throat. Claire took a sip of wine. Hannah checked her phone. That silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I left before dessert. That night, I packed my bags. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just drove until the city lights turned into stars. I didn't cry. I'd spent too many nights doing that already. What I felt instead was something colder, sharper, a quiet resolve. The next morning, I started again. I found a tiny apartment, a job designing interiors for small cafes. My sketches became murals, then my murals became contracts. People who had once called me too different, now called me visionary. Years passed, and for the first time, I was proud to be different. My life became my own canvas, and then one afternoon, while painting a client's new studio, I met Illy. He looked at me like difference was the most beautiful thing in the world. For the first time, I believed it too. By the time Illy proposed, my life looked nothing like the one my family had once pitied. I had my own design studio in the heart of the city, a small but loyal team, and a reputation for turning ordinary spaces into art. People said my work had emotion, soul, words I'd never once heard from my parents' lips. Illy was quiet but steady, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. He'd grown up in a family where love wasn't conditional, where being different was just another word for yourself. He loved that I was bold, that I saw the world through colors instead of rules. When he asked me to marry him, it wasn't with grand speeches or fireworks, just a simple question on a quiet evening, the city lights flickering like stars through our window. And for the first time, I didn't hesitate. I said yes. I wasn't thinking about my family then, at least not consciously. But when the news began to spread, their silence returned like an old ghost. My mother sent a single text, "Congratulations, keep us updated." Claire commented on one of my engagement photos with a half-hearted lovely, while Hannah didn't respond at all. Still, something inside me refused to shrink this time. I wanted them to see me, not the girl they had dismissed, but the woman I had become. So when Illy and I began planning the wedding, I decided I would invite them, not out of obligation, but out of power. I designed the invitations myself, ivory cardstock, with delicate gold leafing, sealed with deep crimson wax. Each one carried my handwriting, elegant and precise. Inside, I wrote a simple line: "You are warmly invited to celebrate love, freedom, and the beauty of being different." Illy watched me as I sealed the last envelope. "Are you sure you want to send those?" he asked gently. "Yes," I said, sliding the final letter into the post, "because this time, they'll have to look me in the eye." When my mother called days later, I could hear the disbelief in her voice. "So you're really having a wedding?" she asked, as if it were some sort of performance. "I am," I replied. "Where, you'll see," I said with a smile. They didn't know what kind of wedding I was planning, or that it would be far beyond anything they had ever imagined. The venue was the Waverly Estate, a seaside mansion wrapped in ivy and old-world charm, the kind of place where every step echoed history. My work with luxury clients had earned me connections. The estate's owner was one of them. When he offered me the space, he said, "You've earned this, Ariana. Make it something unforgettable." And that's exactly what I intended to do, while my family whispered that I'd probably have some odd little ceremony in a garden. I was creating something timeless. I designed every detail, from the hand painted dinnerware to the floral arches bursting with wildflowers. Every choice was symbolic. The lavender represented serenity, the white roses forgiveness, and the deep red dahlias strength. I didn't want to humiliate them. I wanted them to see what they had refused to love. As the wedding day drew closer, I received one last message from my mother. "We'll be there. I hope it's appropriate." I smiled at my phone, my reflection glinting in the dark screen. "Oh," I whispered, "it'll be more than appropriate. It'll be unforgettable." The morning of my wedding dawned calm and golden, the sea whispering against the cliffs below the Waverly estate. Sunlight spilled across the marble terraces, catching on glass lanterns and ribbons of white silk, swaying in the breeze. Every detail was a reflection of me, not the version my family once tried to shape, but the woman I had finally become. As I stood before the mirror, lacing the final ribbon of my gown, I thought of all the times I'd sat alone while someone else's wedding unfolded without me. The ache had long since turned to strength, and today, that strength shimmered in every pearl, every flower, every quiet heartbeat. Guests began to arrive as the afternoon light turned warm and honeyed. Laughter mingled with soft music, drifting from the string quartet. My colleagues, friends, and clients filled the gardens, people who had seen me, believed in me, loved me for everything I once thought made me unlovable. And then, at last, my family appeared. I watched from the upper balcony as they stepped out of their car. My mother's eyes widened the moment she saw the estate, the grandeur, the elegance. My father stood silent beside her, his pride tempered by confusion. My sisters whispered to each other, their faces painted with disbelief. For the first time, they were walking into my world, one that didn't shrink to make room for theirs. When the ceremony began, Illy stood waiting under an arch of white roses and lavender. The ocean glowed behind him like melted gold. As I walked down the aisle, I caught glimpses of faces, some teary, some smiling, and then, finally, my mother's. For a fleeting second, I saw regret flicker across her eyes. The vows were simple, honest. Illy spoke of love without conditions, of admiration for my fire and difference. When it was my turn, I looked not only at him, but at everyone seated before us. My voice trembled, not from fear but from truth. "I spent years believing that being different was something to be ashamed of," I began. "That love came with rules, that belonging meant shrinking. But love, real love, doesn't ask you to hide. It invites you to shine." The crowd was silent. The sea seemed to hold its breath. When the ceremony ended, the reception glowed with laughter and light. Lanterns bobbed above the dance floor, their reflections dancing on the waves. I made my rounds, greeting guests, soaking in the warmth of a world I had built from ashes. My family lingered awkwardly near the fountain, watching but unsure if they belonged. As the evening deepened, I took the microphone for one last toast. To family, I began softly, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. To the ones who taught me what love is and what it isn't. To those who once told me I didn't belong, thank you. You helped me find where I truly do. The words hung in the air, heavy and beautiful. My sisters looked down, my mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. My father raised his glass but couldn't quite meet my gaze. Later, as the band played our final song, Illy pulled me into his arms under a sky freckled with stars. "You did it," he whispered. "You made them see you." I smiled, resting my head on his chest. "No," I said softly. "I made myself see me." And as the night faded into laughter and light, I realized that revenge hadn't been my goal at all. My victory was far sweeter. It was peace.